Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. We'd like to thank Cloud Native Computing Foundation for sponsoring our podcast from CloudNativeCon KubeCon Berlin. Thanks very much for the support here. We've had a great show. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at CloudNativeCon KubeCon Berlin. Here with the two co-chairs of this event here. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
I'm Kelsey. I work on Kubernetes, and I'm still learning like everyone here at the conference.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a developer at Deis, and I work on the Helm project for Kubernetes.
I like that you're still learning.
Always still learning. You can't master anything.
What are you learning?
I'm learning how to empathize for people who use the platform, right? There's technology, and then there's people that use it, and really matching it to actual real-life workflows versus just saying everyone should just use it.
Real-life workflows. Michelle, what does that mean to you?
I mean, it just means like how end users use the tool and what they need out of it, and how they choose to empower their development cycle.
What are you learning that they're needing?
So, for example, if you're a developer, you write an application. All you're trying to do is figure out how to get that app in front of the customer.
Right.
If I show you a bunch of Kubernetes YAML files and try to teach you all the things about Kubernetes, you could care less, and rightfully so. You got things to do. So things start to make sense, like Deis workflow, OpenShift from Red Hat, Tectonic from CoreOS. These things attempt to try to put a little bit more on top to get you quicker to your app to running in front of the customer. So not just technology, but what is the workflow that someone needs to take on?
The organization itself, then. You know,
organization or the individual. You just want to get stuff done. How do I make sure that I'm always talking in terms of getting things done versus geeking out on technology?
So why do you all find that relevant here? I mean, hasn't that always been true? Is there something about what you're learning from this event that makes this more relevant?
Michelle gave a really good keynote about Kubernetes is still hard for developers, and I'll let her explain that in detail.
Yeah, I think it's been an incredible journey to just like see Kubernetes explode. People love geeking out over distributed systems, and honestly, I love geeking out over distributed systems. But that's a lower level concept that's really interesting. And I remember Brendan Burns saying at the very first keynote for KubeCon in San Francisco that he envisioned making distributed systems a CS 101 problem, which means it should be a solved problem that everyone can understand. And the thing is, if everybody can, if this is a solved problem, and if we not only just like geek out over the technology itself, if we make it usable for other people, then we can empower higher level users to do things we couldn't even imagine. And I think what I just wanted to get across yesterday in the talk that I gave was that you may not know what somebody's thinking or what somebody's idea is or what somebody's dreams are, but this is what's so great about technology is that you don't know who you're going to empower, but if you make your technology usable, if you empathize with like the next level, then you can empower people and be really surprised.
But isn't that also then the trappings? Isn't that a trap too, where you're trying to like trade? You're making a trade-off there, right? I mean, you're trying to like make it easier to use, but there's trade-offs in like then being able to then understand the underlying complexities, isn't there?
I think when it comes to the trade-offs, this is why there's so many people here from the community, vendors, sponsors. All of these people will operate at different levels of that. So for some customers, easy is a PaaS. and they're going to want OpenShift, right, or Deis workflow. Some people, easy means a well-documented API so they can build their own integrations. That's easy for them. So for me, when I'm talking to people, I'm asking them, what are you trying to do? And some people will say, hey, we're trying to build a machine learning platform on top of Kubernetes. So they may not necessarily want a PaaS like OpenShift. They may say, I want it easy to build my own custom tools on top of Kubernetes. What would help me is better client libraries and documentations on the API.
So are you finding a lot of people are rolling their own versions of, like building their own distributed systems and kind of building their own systems from scratch? You talk about people like wanting to build tools on top, for example, to do machine learning for, for instance. Is that something that you all are seeing, Michelle? Are you seeing people really trying to build things themselves here?
I'm seeing people really get on board with Kubernetes because it's a well-supported and wonderful platform that a lot of people are really passionate about. I think that people just want to take that to the next level. So I do see people building tooling, and I hear about it all the time in the SIG that I lead. We see demos every single day of incredible tools that people build just to understand or use Kubernetes for their particular use case. I do see a lot of that.
Yeah, so I think the reason why people are building tools is the real question. Like, if you have a Linux system, you're gonna write a bunch of shell scripts to make it usable for you. In Kubernetes, when you get it for the first time, you're like, wow, how do I manage TLS certificate with Let's Encrypt? So then either A, you're gonna go build that on top of Kubernetes yourself, or go find some project on GitHub that does. And it's kind of early days. So we haven't solved every use case, right? We have some tools that are starting to emerge, some patterns that are starting to emerge, but I'm meeting people here that are trying to do high performance computing on Kubernetes. So these are people coming from a different set of tools, coming into our community and seeing gaps because that is not the typical target customer. So now they're telling you, hey, we're building these things to fill the gaps that we had before. That's why they're building some of these things, and it makes sense for now.
Okay, so because it strikes me as interesting that there's this build your own tool, culture really around Kubernetes, right? Where it makes sense, right? You need to build things that fits your specific infrastructure needs, right? But is that also that also creates a whole nother level of complexity, doesn't it? I mean, if you're trying to if you're having to build your own tools now, and now it's like, I think of it this way. Actually, I was having this conversation last night. So if you look at the early days of distributed systems, and you saw the Twitters of the world and the Facebooks of the world, and they had to find ways to scale out their technologies. So they had to build their own, right? There was nothing out there for them. They couldn't buy the stuff off the shelf, right? So now we're getting to this place where there's more people, we're working with more companies who are building out scale out systems, right? And so does that mean that the tooling that they have to build is similar to the process that the Twitter of the years past had to go through, or are we at this point now where the tooling is just a little bit easier to do because all that hard work is done before?
Yeah, I think we got to get really clear about what people are building. So if you take an iPhone, you're not going to build libraries to do graphics processing. You're not going to build libraries to do touch sensors.
Right.
That's what the iPhone platform gives you.
Does, right.
So you're just going to build an app that can take your fingerprint and do payment because that's the platform that's given to you.
Right.
Kubernetes also brings the developer way up here.
Yes.
And the thing you will build is a couple hundred lines of code to allow Kubernetes to talk to some new system to do something internally.
So that's the distinction. There's a difference in scale here, right?
We've rebased. So it's not necessarily a difference in scale. All those people in our community that built those systems at Twitter, they're also contributing, from various companies to give us all a new library set. And this is how it works. You get a programming language, a new programming language, you go back to C, not a lot of standard library. So you built your own JSON parser, XML parser, HTTP server. Golang comes out, there's an included HTTP server, there's an included JSON parser. So now you start to import those, and then you'll build things on top of that. So we just see the foundation keep moving up. as things progress.
So when you say it's early days, Michelle, how do you think of these as early days? What is how do you clarify it in your own mind that these are early days?
So it's actually something that Kelsey just mentioned. People are building components and tools that don't exist yet, that other people will need, and then they're sharing them. And so I think these are early days because you don't see a lot of opinion in these tools. It's like, oh, I just need to fill the gaps, to deploy my particular application.
Like what gaps, for example?
Well, I work on Helm, which
Right.
is a Kubernetes package manager, and the idea is with Kubernetes, you can install YAML files, and then you have to keep track of those YAML files, and that's really tedious. So we just make that whole thing easier, and so you can think of your YAML files working together as a logical application and install that all together and manage the life cycle of your application. So that's a pretty pretty simple thing that people need, and then people build tools around that for their particular pipeline.
Mm-hmm. How do you see these as early days? What questions are you getting that leads you to believe that these are early days?
There's no best practices. People come to me and say, Kelsey, what is the best practice? I was like, there is none. There's not enough practice for there to be a best. So we're learning from you. Like my talk today around federation, we have an idea, and the idea is a proposal. It wasn't based necessarily on people using Kubernetes that way for 10 years. So it's not a best practice.
Right.
Most of this stuff is a proposal. Here's what I'm thinking, and you're gonna try it out for a while, and time will tell, was that a mistake? Did it cause more pain than it solved? So that's how you know in the early days, because there isn't obvious things to do. You don't grab, I think there's a few things, like if you have a stateless application, you can run 3 commands and that app will be available for people. But when it comes to a database, what is the best practice for running Postgres on Kubernetes? You have 10 different people, you're gonna get 15 different answers.
Exactly, right. So what are some of the hard problems you see people are trying to solve right now out of this show? How is this show different than the last KubeCon that you attended in terms of those hard problems that people are trying to solve?
This is a day 2 conference. If you look at most of the talks, they're centered around not necessarily Kubernetes, but the day 2 things like CoreOS talking about operators. How do you build these smart things that manage things like Postgres? Helm showing off how do you package these applications for reusability? How do you secure your cluster for the long term? So it's not just about, oh, I have a Kubernetes cluster, let me show it to you. It's more like, I've been running Kubernetes for a year, and here's how we solve the things that eventually come up in that situation.
Yeah, Kelsey hit the nail right on the head, is I think the metaphor, but yeah, exactly. Day 2 is the conversation we're seeing now at the first KubeCon in San Francisco. People are asking, what is a Kubernetes and what is a pod? And now we're having conversations about what are best practices, what are the patterns, and I think that is really telling.
That's an interesting point I think that you bring up. It's like, often what you need to understand first is how, what is the language, right? And how do you think about the language, right? And how do you think about the different ways that the technology is described, right? And how do you think about that? It sounds like that we're past that point right now. People understand pods, they understand these, a little bit better. Now we're getting into this next phase where we're trying to understand what the patterns are. What are those patterns that you find interesting, that you're starting to see, that strike you as maybe not outliers, but more about actually what reflect the direction of the overall ecosystem itself?
I think one of the most clear patterns we have right now is around building this concept of an operator. If you want to add functionality to Kubernetes, let's not try to integrate it into core anymore. We don't need to make core any bigger than it is now. We need to just make that bulletproof and let the ecosystem do its thing. And that pattern is starting to take shapes now. There's a name for it. We call it an operator, right? CoreOS coined the term. But it's really the way Kubernetes works internally, right? It has these control loops. So now when people say, hey, Let's Encrypt will allow you to have a certificate for every app. How do you integrate it? Oh, I know. A config map, third-party resource, and a control loop. There you go. And everyone is using that pattern to give new functionality to a Kubernetes cluster. And that's how you see people adopting new ideas. And I think that is a very clear way of extending Kubernetes.
That's interesting. Are you seeing any specific patterns that strike you as, as thematic that, that relate to like the direction of Kubernetes ecosystem overall?
Yeah, I think, again, Kelsey really hit the nail on the head. That's the phrase, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're seeing that internally with Kubernetes as well, with the aggregated API servers proposal. So if you want to add functionality to Kubernetes yourself at runtime, you can do that. They're giving you the ability to do that instead of adding it to Kubernetes to make it your own if you need that. So that's really interesting to me particularly. But it's the same pattern that Kubernetes is talking about, that Kelsey is talking about.
Excellent. Okay. So looking forward, for beyond the conference, what are going to be some of the things that you're going to go away with, and you want to have conversations with people about, to extend kind of the discussions that you had here?
I took notes on the new people to our community that have read previous blog posts from other people, so it's starting to learn. They're starting to come in at a higher level than what is a pod. So they're kicking the tires and getting success a little quicker. And they're interested in day two problems like, hey, my company has this. And I'm asking them, why are you asking the same questions over and over again? We have a communication problem right now, right? We have Slack as a communication mechanism. Is it serving people correctly? Do people in the community that have experience, do they have the right platform to communicate out? So what can we do as kind of leaders in that community to give them the right platform, whether they're speaking at KubeCon, whether we highlight their blog posts, or we help them get their contributions into Kubernetes incubated projects. So what can we do to give voices to other people in the community who are solving problems closer to our users?
Michelle, when you're gonna leave here and you're gonna get on that plane and you're gonna fly on home, what are you gonna be thinking about? What are you gonna be thinking about the conversations you want to have going forward?
I'm really passionate about developer experiences in particular. I have my histories in application development, in web development, and the talk that I gave was about empowering developers, and so the call to action from there was to join the SIG and have discussions on how we can create these best practices and what kind of tooling do we want to see and how do we make that happen. So I think that's definitely my focus. And empowering new users. I've had a lot of people come up to me asking me how they can get involved, and I've pointed them in the right direction, I think, to SIGs, and that's kind of the entry point in the Kubernetes community. So I'm going to follow along with their journey and see how that goes for them and how we can iterate on that process.
Well, Kelsey, Michelle, thank you so much for taking some time to talk. It's been a great conference. I think people have really gotten a lot out of it, so great job.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. We'd like to thank Cloud Native Computing Foundation for sponsoring our podcast from CloudNativeCon KubeCon Berlin.